Hey, let's give thanks for another rivalry weekend about to be upon us here. What's it going to take to win a national championship? The college football playoff rankings once again came out last night. If you got in here and hung out with us as we did our live rankings reaction, we appreciate y'all being there. Gave you our thoughts on the rankings. I don't think there's too much to unpack within those, but what's it going to take to win a national title? We'll talk about that and a lot of other things on this beautiful Big Picture Wednesday. It is November 22nd, 2023, the last one in history, so I'm begging you, let's make it the greatest one ever. Let's make it the greatest one this earth has ever seen. We're going to do that right now by talking some college football. Got a ton to unpack. As I mentioned, what's it going to take to win a Natty? We'll talk about that for some of these top contenders. Also, going to jump into a little bit of the scenario season, if you will. Every single week, we've made a tradition now on this Wednesday show to go to the Twitter sphere or the X sphere, whatever you want to call it right now, and hear from y'all and say, okay, what do we think could happen here? Heck, what are some scenarios that you want to talk about that we think the committee maybe would act in accordance with? What would they do if we get a 2-loss champ from this conference, or if Bama beats Georgia as a 1-loss SEC champ, or Texas loses again? Like, there's so many scenarios. Got a lot of great ones from y'all, again, on my Twitter page, at Jody Pickell. Follow me there if you're not already. Got a lot of scenarios from y'all. We'll unpack those here in just a few short minutes. We appreciate y'all adding into that. We prefaced the show telling you, hey, it's rivalry weekend. There is a lot of Thanksgiving in the air. There's also quite a bit of hatred in the air. I think rivalry is probably another form of love, but there's also some hate baked in there. What's the aftermath going to be of the game? Like Michigan, Ohio State, there has been more off-field storylines than I think any other game that I can remember in the modern college football era. What is the potential aftermath for either outcome? So if Ohio State wins, what are people going to say? If Michigan wins, what are people going to say? I think the aftermath there, I want to make sure we get a little bit ahead of it, because there's going to be some overreactions, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page in guarding against that. Also, the Pulse the Program series rolling right along. We're going to make a stop this week in Athens, Georgia, and take a look at what's going on with the back-to-back national champs. If y'all saw that cinematic recap that creative team at Georgia put out, dude, it was a movie. So good. If you haven't watched that, would recommend you go check that out after you watch the show, of course. But gave us a little interesting peek into, I think, the internal feel at Georgia. So we'll give you our pulse as best we can tell there. Glad you're here. Very, very happy to have you a part of this show right now. Quick scheduling note. A lot of shows will be off the air tomorrow. We are not one of them. Okay, we will have a show for you tomorrow, Thanksgiving morning, same time, same place. We'll premiere it. It'll be on this YouTube channel, 11 a.m. Eastern. It'll be in your podcast feed, all that. So just letting you know, this is not canceled. This is not stopping. We are keeping on. College football is the greatest thing ever. We only have so many weeks of it, so that means we only get so many shows in season. We're not going to take a bye week or a bye show with Thanksgiving. So, in fact, we're actually going to turn the volume up a little bit on that show. Got Andy Staples on the show, got Jake Olson on the show, the USC alum who's the first Division I blind football player who long snapped for USC, a friend of ours. He's on the show. So make sure dialed in for that. We'll have our thoughts there, and we'll have a good time. Hey, before we get started here, we got a new individual in the producer chair today. Man, the myth, the legend, Trey Andy. Trey, how you feeling, baby? I want to give you a chance to say what's up to the people. I appreciate you stepping in here and pinch hitting, as Nick Brake is just in high demand these days, as a man of his stature is. What's going on, baby? How we feeling?
I'm feeling great, JD. Thank you for having me on the program here. This is not the debut, but this is one of the first times we've got to get on and chalk it up. So I'm excited, man. I'm thankful. Thankful for, some more good football, like you said, rivalry weekend again this week. And, ultimately, JD, I think I'm just thankful for another poll. We're going to talk about what are you thankful for this Thanksgiving week?
Man, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for the entire team here, from yourself to Nick Brake to everyone up in the office that makes this show happen. I'm also thankful for everybody that watches this show. And that sounds a little bit cliche, but like genuinely, I mean, you and I have a fair amount of windshield time together as we're going from here to Columbus and here to Tuscaloosa, here to Knoxville. And so we've been on the road together a fair amount. And just the fact that we get to do this, and we have this conversation a fair amount, we get to do this, and then at the end of the week a paycheck hits, like that in itself is the greatest heist of all time. So I'm extremely thankful for that, and thankful that we get to do it together, brother. So it's a good deal all around. Thanksgiving plans. Before we get rolling here, Thanksgiving plans, you got any big ones?
I'm going to be actually headed back to the Palmetto State of South Carolina. Okay. We'll be going to the Palmetto Bowl, the rivalry game between Clemson and South Carolina on Saturday, I believe.
Boom.
But gonna go see the family, do all that. Hopefully, I can find the passion of a guy like Connor Stallions this weekend. As we watch some good Thanksgiving football. As we have another program show for you tomorrow, like you said there as well. But yeah, man, going back to SC, what you got going on, JD?
You know what? We'll be in Atlanta. A little bit of Thanksgiving with the family. Sister just got married, so first Thanksgiving with her now husband. Be a good time. So yeah, man, be a lot of ball to watch, but excited to jump into it, man. So Trey, appreciate you producing the show, brother, and we'll check back in with you here at the end of this deal. So y'all get your question and answers, or get your questions into Trey Natty, and we'll have some answers for you at the end of the show. Trey, you the man, brother. Let's have a great one.
Yes, sir, JD. You were the man, and let's get into it. Let's
get right to it.
Get some CFP talk going.
Let's get right to it, baby. As Trey just mentioned, college football playoff rankings came out yet again last night. We already kind of reacted to them, but it sort of got me thinking a little bit here. With the way that this top six is situated, we can have a conversation around their path to the playoff, and I think it's all very fair to talk about, if Oregon wins out, do they get in? I think they do. If Washington wins out, do they get in? I think they do. I think that's kind of a conversation we've had for a while now, though. The way that I'm looking at this, all six of these teams control their own destiny. So here's the big question I want to ask here. What's it going to take to win a national title? Forget just getting to the dance. Forget being fourth in inches. I'm trying to go the distance, to quote Aubrey Graham. What's it going to take to win a national title? I want to go through these six teams here right now. First and foremost, though, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. As you can tell, we talk college football every single day. You love ball. We love ball. We talk about it because it's our job and we love it. So we're glad to have you here. So no extra additives, no high fructose corn syrup, as we say here a lot. It's ball and only ball. So make sure you're subscribed, and we appreciate y'all being a part of this. So the committee has Oregon at 6. We've talked about why they're at 6. We don't need to unpack that too much. They're a top 4 caliber team. If they handle business and win out, they will be in the playoff. But how does Oregon win a national title? I think Oregon wins a national championship if they are as good as advertised. Because what I think that means is what we've seen from them on the line of scrimmage has been nothing short of phenomenal. They're top 5 in the country in terms of yards per carry on offense. They're top 10 in the country in terms of yards allowed on the ground per game. And what it's going to take for Oregon to win a national championship, more than likely, means you got to go through a line of scrimmage team like a Georgia, like a Michigan, like an Ohio State. And so I think they have the chops to do that. And we've seen it multiple times where they've looked phenomenal on the line of scrimmage against teams like a Utah. Heck, they looked great on the line of scrimmage against a team like Washington, even though they lost that game. But the question is, how do they stack up when they play one of those elite line of scrimmage teams? I think we've seen them be tremendous. We've seen them be advertised as tremendous, but will they be as good as advertised? That's the big question. Because from where I'm sitting, the way they're advertised is a Big Ten football team in the trenches. I don't think that's false advertising, just so we're clear. And then you have one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Bo Nix, who may end up winning the Heisman Trophy. So for them, just be as good as advertised. I think that's how Oregon gets it done. My worry for them now, when it comes to what could keep it from a college football national championship in that playoff, how does their secondary match up if they run into Washington yet again? Now, we'll probably see that when it comes to the Pac-12 championship game, so maybe this is sort of a moot point as a whole. But the secondary playing one of those elite perimeter teams, if they ran into Ohio State and had to play Marvin Harrison Jr. or Roma Dunze yet again in that Pac-12 title spot, I wonder how Oregon would be able to shape up in that sense. Not that they're bad by any stretch, but just you have to be elite in every facet to win a national title, in my opinion at least, or in most facets to win a national title. That's my question mark for Oregon. Now, number 5, you got Florida State. And, I mean, the whole ranking with them is, I think it's fair. I don't think we're dropping them because of Jordan Travis being hurt. Like we said last night, I think Washington and their eye test and their resume now put them ahead of Florida State. So, Florida State, handle business. You're in the dance. Florida State wins a national championship if they can bottle up a little bit of that 2014 Ohio State juice. Because remember, that was a team where it wasn't just the backup quarterback. You went to the backup quarterback in Cardale Jones, 12 gauge himself, and they just had a magical run. And, I mean, he ended up just being the greatest, most pleasant surprise in Ohio State Buckeye history, being the man at quarterback. So, obviously now, Florida State going from Jordan Travis to Tate Rodemaker. He's thrust into action with the injury of their guy, Jordan Travis. Need to be able to not just be serviceable, but be like Cardale Jones good. Now, I'm not saying you have to play the same kind of style Cardale Jones played where you're running around and throwing your body into people, but I am saying the offense has to stay at the same level, if not elevate from where they are right now. Now, a big part of that run for Ohio State, Yes, Cardell Jones came in and got buckets. That's all true. But I think the potentially more important part of this for Florida State is Trey Benson, their running back, has to be what Zeke Elliott was to that Ohio State offense. Because remember, Zeke had like a historic run in that playoff. From the Alabama game to the Oregon game, I believe he was over 200 yards. I want to say in both games, but definitely in the Alabama game. I think it's going to take an effort like that from Trey Benson to lean on him to be able to make this offense more explosive and to kind of have him come into that mode to make them dangerous. Because the question, or I guess the worry, would be the inconsistency we've seen at times from Florida State. The response mechanism, I think, is one of the best in the country. The concern is we've had to see that response mechanism a fair amount. So for Florida State, I really do think there's that blueprint laid out of, okay, your quarterback and your backup quarterback. We've seen it done before. We've seen a backup quarterback come in here and lead a team to a national championship, but a big part of it will take a heavy dose of production in the run game. Now at number 4, you got Washington. And the thing for them, man, like when they get in gear, like all y'all that have played like Super Smash Bros. Or Mario Kart or any of those Nintendo games, when they get that star power going, they're untouchable. When they're in their zone, there is arguably nobody better in the country. Because when they have Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan all healthy and all operating at an elite level, and you have Michael Penix Jr. just dealing the mail like FedEx, like they are in really, really good shape. And the reason why I say that is the way this offense is built, it demands a lot of you physically to execute. But when you're executing, I think it's borderline unstoppable. Because of how wide those splits are, it creates a lot of one-on-one matchups. And how many guys they have that can beat you one-on-one. Rome Odunze, most specifically, and probably most emphatically, like when they're in the zone, I think all bets are off. Now, the worry for them would be, okay, well, the offense maybe has a day where they're not 100% on the money. And they've had days like that. Don't get it twisted. We've seen them win ugly. But the concern would be you would have a day like that against an elite level team. So, like, the question for me is, what happens if they play one of those elite game control teams? And I'm talking about an Ohio State, which is what they've been as of late, a Michigan, a Georgia, a team that's just going to say, you know what, we're going to run the football at you. And they're one of the best teams running the football in the country, one of those teams, and they control the game. That would be my concern. Now, again, if they're on, that's their path to a national title. I'm saying it right now. They could win a national title, but it would take something like that in my mind. Now, at 3, you got Michigan. 2 things have to happen for Michigan to win a national title. I got two ifs. The first is if they're still the bully on the block. Okay. Second, if that offense and the next evolution in the passing game is real. So let's start with that first one. Michigan, a season ago, was running for right around 240 yards a game. Like there was no wondering, guessing, thinking, are they not? They were the bully. Period. Mic drop, the end. With that kind of rushing number. Now, right now, they're running for 171 yards a game. To be clear, that's still really good. There is a lot of schools across the country that would trade their punt team unit for that kind of rushing number, okay? But we understand, 240 versus 170, that's a pretty big disparity. And it's not a question of can they to me. It's a matter of will they / is that something they can do against elite competition? Okay, so if they're still that bully on the block, that's kind of been their identity and their takeover button, if you will. If they still have that, they're going to be a very difficult out because I think they'll lean into that a little bit more than we saw them do last year. Now, the other part of this, like I said, if the evolution of the pass game that we've seen to this point be effective, if that's real. And I don't mean is it real in terms of can J.J. McCarthy make those throws. I'm asking can they do that consistently in the big spots? Because that was sort of the thought process all off season was, well, if J.J. McCarthy can push the ball downfield a little bit more, like I don't know how you defend Michigan. Because you can't play them with a light box or even an honest box and expect to stop the run and then feel good about what you have behind them if J.J. McCarthy is dealing. And the thing with them right now is like, the reason why I ask if it's real is because we've seen it. Like J.J. McCarthy a season ago in the regular season threw for over 250 yards twice. So far, he's done it 4 times. Okay, so there's a very, very clearly another step, at least philosophically for this offense, to push the ball downfield. But what happens when they play the Ohio States? What happens when they play the Georgias? I'm excited to see it. We'll get to see it this Saturday, but that has to be a reality for them because if they end up being one-dimensional, I don't think you can be one-dimensional against a team like a Georgia. Heck, this weekend, like an Ohio State. I don't think that's something you can have in the cards. So, for Michigan, Those are the questions we have, and that's what it's going to take to win a national title. Now, team that we're going to see them play this weekend. Ohio State's at 2. No issue with the ranking here because they're going to figure out that number 2 and number 3 spot there. But what I think it takes for them to win a national title is, I think what most people would say at this point in time, if Kyle McCord can be 10 to 15% more dynamic, because he's been really efficient. I think he's done everything that he's been asked to do as the guy at Ohio State. But we're getting to this point in the season where you have to do more than what's asked of you. Because what's asked of you is to play 12 games and to, win every single one of them, but to beat elite level competition, to beat a Michigan, to beat a Georgia, to win a national title, I don't think you can have just a guy who does his job. I think winning the national title requires everyone to do more than just their job. Okay, so when I talk about Kyle McCord, I don't have a ton of extra things to say about Ohio State because the roster itself is built to win a national title. Like, defense has totally reinvented themselves in my mind in regards to being so much more comfortable in this scheme under Jim Knowles. They're allowing, I think if it's not single digits, it's very close to single digit points per game. They might be somewhere in the range of like 10 at this point. Like, they are built to win a national title on the defensive side of the ball. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best player in college football. If you have a quarterback that can unlock all of that talent on the perimeter to the nth degree, like unlock it to the boss level, at that point, Ohio State has no weaknesses. So he's got a tremendous stat line right now. I mean, top 10 in QBR, but it's going to take more than just efficiency to beat Georgia from where I'm sitting. Now, speaking of Georgia, we've been extremely high on Georgia all season long. We make no apologies for it. I think they're the best team in the country. I think they've been the best team in the country the last couple of weeks. What I think it's going to take for them to win a national title is, one, staying healthy. We've seen them have some injuries, whether it's Ladd McConkey week in and week out, Brock Bowers just now getting back in the lineup, and you kind of held your breath a little bit when you saw him limping at times against Tennessee. And so that's obviously, the price of admission. But the other part of this is there are some really new pieces for Georgia. Like, they were 80th in the country in terms of returning production coming into this season. And we'll talk about Georgia and the program here a little bit later in the show. But we understand now, like, the key for Georgia a season ago, kind of their ace up the sleeve, was they had some really, really elite experience at some really important spots. Like Stetson Bennett, all the jokes made about how long he was in college, make him if you want to. Dude was never, ever flustered or never looked like he wasn't the epitome of composure playing quarterback for them. Same thing with Todd Monken. Like, they had been in those spots together before. Now, new quarterback, new OC. They're somewhere in the range of, I think they're like just over 50% or so return to production from last season. I understand a lot of these guys now have played a lot of ball together. You're expecting the new pieces to not play like new pieces. But in the spots Georgia would have to be in to win a national title, we're talking, obviously, the SEC championship. We're talking college football playoff game. We're talking national title. All three of those, very bright lights, very good competition. Is there any breaking in segment for Georgia when it comes to those kind of games? Because the one knock you probably have on Georgia at this point in time is the slow starts. Like, first play of the game, Tennessee, they're ripping off a big touchdown. Auburn, they give Georgia trouble for the majority of the game. South Carolina, they're up at half. And understand, parts of those were different early in the year. I think it's a different Georgia team than what they were against South Carolina and Auburn. But just so we're all clear, there cannot be any more letdown quarters for Georgia. And I think you're seeing some of that with the new production that is, now present in Athens. But what you didn't have from last year, like, there are guys here, I think, that are still totally trying to get completely settled, which isn't, wrong. It's not a thing we got to necessarily be super upset at Georgia for, but I am just saying now it is go time. You can't have a letdown quarter against Bama. Can't have a letdown quarter against Ohio State, Michigan, so on and so forth. So for Georgia, that's the big piece for me is, can they stay healthy, and can those new pieces totally settle in and keep from any letdown quarters? So I'm excited to see it, but that's what's going to take for those top 6 teams to win a national title. To be clear, I think all of them control their own destiny when it comes to their college football playoff aspirations. All right, speaking of aspirations, man, we got some big ones here. And some big ones when it comes to Prize Picks. So I want to get Trey Annity's thoughts here in just a second on our national title hinge points, if you will. But let's move into the Prize Picks segment here and let y'all know Prize Picks bringing y'all the hard count today. Tremendous opportunity this rivalry weekend. Gonna circle the wagons, rally the troops, whatever you want to say. I sat here on Tuesday and I told y'all we let y'all down last couple of weeks, and we're not running from it. We're not hiding from it. You hear coaches at post-game press conference, they blame NIL, they blame support, they blame their roster. We're not doing that here. We're not running from it. We've let y'all down the last couple of weeks. So if you want to trust history, fade us. That's fine. Those that are in the foxhole, though, we're going to circle the wagons. Like I said, we're going to burn the boats. We're going to lock the gates. And nobody's safe. All right? To quote Kirby Smart, nobody's safe this week. We got Prize Picks. Again, redeem code JD, 100% deposit match. For those of y'all wondering what Prize Picks is, daily fantasy. You put together different squares of certain things a player may do in a game or different combinations like we'll talk about here. And you have a number there. The more, the less, whatever they do, string those together, and it'll make more sense if we explain it here. So the squares that we have for this weekend, we got a little combo, right? Little combo here for our first square of Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy passing, rushing, receiving touchdowns together. The number is at 4.5. You know how we feel about this here. We like to see good things happen to good people. Both those individuals we deem to be good people. Let's take the more there, baby, okay? So Oregon playing Oregon State. Obviously, Michigan playing Ohio State. I think they can together account for that number. Now, last time we took a combo like this, Bo Nix just accounted for like 6 touchdowns, so he kind of got it by himself. But we'll take the more there, so go ahead and play that one. Next square, we like KJ Jefferson and Quinn Ewers. So a big combo week for the show now. Keep an eye on this. KJ Jefferson, Quinn Ewers combining for a passing, rushing, receiving touchdown at 4. We like the more there as well. Quinn Ewers kind of getting more comfortable. KJ Jefferson going to play for his head coach now, last week of the season. I'm excited to watch that one. We'll take the more there again. Good things, good people. Let's ride with it. Jalen Milroe. His number is half a rushing touchdown against Auburn. Y'all, weird things happen in this game. You may need Jalen Milroe to run for a touchdown in this game. We'll take the more there. So we like the more on all those plays. Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, 4.5 total touchdowns. KJ Jefferson, Quinn Ewers, 4 total touchdowns. Jalen Milroe, rushing touchdown. Again, that's just a more special, okay? We're rolling with the more this week. We took a less last week, never again. Rolling with the more this week. Now, if you want to power play this, be our guest, you would make 5x your entry. We're going to flex play it. So that means if all 3 of these hit, and we expect them to, we would make 2.25 times our entry. Now, if 2 out of 3 hit, oh, darn, we don't get anything, right? No, wrong. If 2 out of 3 of these hit, we'll take 1.25x our entry. So bottom line, don't need all 3 to hit to make some money. Fade or follow. If you want to fade, be our guest. Be our guest. I'm just saying, if you don't like us at our 0 for 2, 0 for 3, whatever we are the last couple of weeks, you don't deserve us when we go jackpot mode here the next couple of weeks. So again, a big shout out to Prize Picks making this happen for the show and for bringing y'all the hard count today. So we appreciate Prize Picks and appreciate y'all being dialed in. A great way to support the show. Again, redeem code JD, 100% deposit match up to $100. You and the cousins hanging out, watching some ball this weekend. Very, very important. I say this too. Tack on to that, Christian McCaffrey, half a rushing yard is the special right now for Prize Picks. So throw that in there. Make it a flex play with all 4 of those picks, and you're in good shape, okay? So that's very, very important. Christian McCaffrey, half a rushing yard. It's not college football. Doesn't matter. Probably should have won a Heisman when he was at Stanford. Beside the point, half a rushing yard. That is essentially theft, but we'll take it, add it onto our flex play, and the good times will keep on rolling. So we appreciate Prize Picks. Again, redeem code JD, 100% deposit match. Great way to support the show. So we're about to get into these playoff scenarios here in just a second. But I want to chop it up with our guy, Trey Annity, because we got a different format of the show today. We're just kind of just guys talking ball, just guys chopping it up. Trey, I want to throw back to our segment we were just in right there. This is not something I told you I was going to ask you. Of those 6 teams, who would you say is maybe the most sneaky college football playoff national championship guy?
Sneaky is an interesting word, JD, because I think Oregon on the surface is that team. I mean, this is a 1-loss team that probably has the most talented roster in the Pac-12 that, could be undefeated if it was a couple plays different in Washington. But I think Washington is actually that sneaky team because, as weird as it sounds, them winning that game, they now fly under the radar. People, don't talk about their playoff path as much or, what it's going to take or, trying to justify the ways that they can get into the playoff or the ways that they can, make it to the national title, win the national title. I think for Oregon, you're hearing a lot more of that conversation because they're on the bubble. And Washington at this point, is all but in to this year's playoff. But, JD, I think at the top as well, it's difficult because we've seen so much inconsistency from the 2 Big Ten schools. And for Michigan, I don't think that was the case up until this past week. And for Ohio State, they've started to kind of, reflect, what Michigan was at the beginning of the season. And they've been the pillar of consistency here. So, if they're sneaking us somewhere in there, I'd say maybe, Ohio State continues to be that team just because they're a little bit having a little bit more of a quiet season, I guess, without the headlines of the sign stealing scandal and, having a bit more of an easy run here. They were the number one team in this playoff poll at one point and now have kind of, slid back and taken that back seat in a sense. So, sneaky's tough, but I'd say probably Washington is the team I'm circling first. JD, I know, maybe you were on that Oregon bandwagon to start the year. Is that still the case?
100%. Yeah, I'm still very firmly on the bandwagon, but like as we get closer and closer to it, it's never good to be on a crowded bandwagon. You know what I mean? Like it's never good when you're riding through the fields and you're going over, the terrain and you feel like maybe the bandwagon is taking a little bit more strain than you would like it to. Like we were pretty early on the Oregon bandwagon, but as it gets more crowded, I'm like, hey, are we on the right vehicle? Because that Washington bandwagon's moving pretty quickly. And there's not as many people on it. Sometimes that's the bandwagon you want to be on. You know what I'm saying?
100%. And you were, you got to give you credit here, JD. You were one of the first on that bandwagon.
We'll see if we deserve credit or not, I guess, here in a couple of weeks or maybe even this weekend.
Fully intact at that point. I'm with you. It's getting a little heavy on that bandwagon. But, you bought stock early. Like Dabo Sweeney said a few weeks ago, buy stock
there
now.
We go.
If you want to tie it back to the prize picks, I know it's been a couple rough weeks, but buy stock in these prize picks and, maybe buy stock in another one of those Pac-12 schools, Washington now, instead of Oregon, because it is a full bandwagon.
The boys are rolling.
JD, what were your thoughts on the two Big Ten schools there in the top three of these rankings?
I don't have any. It's so funny because we have so much I don't want to say fake outrage, but the outrage itself to me is so funny when we're about to play the biggest game of the season between Michigan and Ohio State, and you have people saying, well, why is Oregon so high? Why is Michigan so high? And it's like, are we really going to say they're not a top 4 team? And if they beat Ohio State, is that a conversation we're having either way? Like if Michigan were number 7 this week and Ohio State were number 2, if Michigan beat Ohio State, are they not still in the top 4? Are we not kind of still saying the same thing about them? You know what I mean? So, I mean, the whole outrage around where they're ranked this week is funny because it's all going to eventually play itself out. You know what I mean?
What's the criteria there, JD? I mean, this is a conversation I think we've had since that first poll. Is it resume? Are they freezing wins truly? In your opinion, after seeing what is now a 4th poll, what is the criteria that this committee's going about it with?
I think it's sliding. And I think you and I talked about this in the hallway the other day, which is where all of the best conversations happen. Yes. It feels like the committee is getting into the room and saying, hey, what do we think this weekend? As opposed to saying, okay, here's our formula. Everybody refer to this whiteboard here. We weight resume this much. We weight eye test this much. And then going forward, we're going to kind of weight these wins accordingly. Like it feels like every single week eye test has more and more juice to it, which we'll get to here in just a second, talking about these playoff scenarios. But I'm with you. The consistency isn't so much there, but it's one of those things where it's like, hey, these are the new rules of the game. And so whether we agree or not, this is the criteria we're trying to get our mind around, or the lack thereof. It's definitely inconsistent.
Well, we got to get back to the show, but I just got one more question for you here. I know you're traditionalist, JD. Would you prefer this ambiguous, difficult to understand formula what the committee's going about it, or so it seems, or would you prefer something a little bit closer to what we had with the BCS computer system era, whatever you want to call it?
That's a great question for the chat too. So if you're in the chat right now, you like the computer BCS system or you like the committee, because there's something to be said for, you don't know what you got till it's gone. You don't know the good days until you've left them. I would say I actually appreciate the human element, because while there's probably a wider margin for the human element to be wrong, I think there's also just as much margin for us to course correct. Now, to this point, I know we say this a lot, but we get to the selection Sunday and the BCS and the committee, I think are yet to disagree on that Final Four at least. I don't know if it stretches past the Final Four, but we'll see. This might be the year where they disagree. So we'll see here, Big Trey. We'll see. That's the man, Trey Yanity, just bringing it. How about some of the bars he was dropping? Pillar of consistency. I'm adding that to the vocabulary. I'm gonna have to write that one down and make that a buzzword for me going forward. You know what I'm saying?
I certainly can't take credit for that one. And I learned from the best here, JD. So
I don't know about that, man. Hey, I appreciate you. I appreciate you, Trey Yanity. Again, get those questions in here. About to answer those in just a few short minutes. But before we do that, it's Big Picture Wednesday. And every Big Picture Wednesday here, we break down the playoff scenarios, not just the playoff scenarios that we want to talk about. We go to the Twitter sphere, we go to the X sphere, whatever you want to talk about, and we say, hey, what is your most intriguing college football playoff scenario? Because it changes week to week now. As we get more data each weekend, people lose, people win. We kind of get more clarity. But we got 3 different scenarios I want to talk about right now. And the first one coming from our man, CFB Budge. And this is a friend of the show. Sent us a magazine in the offseason for their own preseason preview, which was phenomenal. So check him out already if you haven't on socials. But his scenario I thought was interesting. He says we got an undefeated Florida State from the ACC. You got Ohio State as your Big Ten champ, and you got Washington as your Big Ten champ. So 3 undefeated champions from those 3 conferences. Then he says we got a 1-loss Big 12 champ and a 1-loss SEC champ in Alabama. I'm assuming there we're beating Georgia. So the question here that he asks is, does the committee respect head-to-head? Now, what I think would happen here, if all things were to be even, if we don't see some drastic data point like Bama blows out Georgia or Texas, blows out whoever they play in the Big 12 title game or whatever, like if we don't see anything drastic on the data points and we kind of see it stay fairly steady across the board, I think Texas would be in. Now, have they looked as dominant as we saw week 2 in Tuscaloosa? Not necessarily, but I do think you have to say, hey, the resume is what the resume is. That head-to-head winning double digits in Tuscaloosa, like you have to respect that, okay? So I think they would respect that. Now, again, going back to that caveat, the eye test is going to matter here. So the reason why I think it's going to matter here, because as much as we've said about the inconsistency of the committee, they have told us they care about the eye test a lot. And the reason we know that is Georgia was up to number 1 2 weeks ago, jumping over Ohio State when Ohio State still, in my opinion, had a arguably better resume. Oregon, the highest one-loss team, or the highest-ranked one-loss team right now in the country at number 6. Their resume, I don't think, is quite as good as an Alabama or as good as a Texas, but the eye test, they care about that with Oregon. Michigan at number 3, they have 1 ranked win, the eye test. So the eye test matters a lot to this committee. And so if Alabama were to put something on tape and show the committee, hey, we are emphatically a top 4 team. And that would look like, again, a 10-point or more margin of victory over Georgia in Atlanta. And let's say Texas kind of looks shaky against Texas Tech. They win by a score. Kind of looks shaky in the Big 12 title game. They win by a score. If we find ourselves in that situation with a convincing Bama win over Georgia and Texas not really earning too many style points, at that point in time, I think Bama would jump Texas. Now, is it fair? I don't know about that, but I think that's what would happen. So in that scenario, again, all things even, I think you respect head-to-head. But if you get something drastic here, if I cannot get out of my mind the scenario where Alabama somehow convincingly beats Georgia in Atlanta, and that's the last thing you tell the committee before they make the decision on Selection Sunday. Like that snapshot, I think, would matter a lot to the committee by nature of what we've seen matter to the committee to this point. And I think it'd be hard for them to just kind of turn a blind eye to that and look back to week 2. Recency bias, again, whether it's fair or not, I think it matters to these folks. All right, now scenario 2 from our guy Liam Neighbors. We spent probably about a half page of notes here. I felt like I was doing long division trying to figure this one out. Liam Neighbors has said Oregon State beats Oregon this weekend, but Oregon still plays for a Pac-12 championship. So we're assuming in this situation, Arizona ends up losing. So Oregon, they still find themselves in Vegas, playing Washington. And then Oregon beats Washington as a 2-loss Pac-12 champ, is what we have in that conference from Oregon. And then he says Texas, they catch a second loss somewhere along the way. So let's just say, for instance, Texas loses to Texas Tech this weekend. I'm not predicting it. I'm just saying for the sake of this conversation, the Big 12 then somehow, some way has a multiple loss Big 12 champ. Okay, so if you're keeping track now, Pac-12, 2-loss champ, Big 12, multiple loss champ as well. And then he says you have Alabama winning the SEC with 1 loss. So we're assuming there they beat Georgia. Not assuming, we know that that's the matchup we got there. So they're a 1-loss champ over Georgia, meaning they beat Auburn this weekend. So you have a 1-loss SEC champ in Bama, multiple loss Big 12 champ, and Oregon is your 2-loss Pac-12 champ. Now that's all he gives us in this scenario. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that we get an undefeated Florida State and we get an undefeated Ohio State or an undefeated Michigan as our Big 10 champion. All right, so just to kind of keep that neat and tidy. Who gets in? All right, let's kind of stretch here a little bit and really put on the thinking cap. The Big 10 champion, obviously, you're in. The ACC champ, obviously, undefeated Florida State, you're in. I think a one-loss SEC champ, Alabama, I think you're in. I think from what we've seen from the committee over the last couple of years, I understand it's a different committee, but just from what we know about the college football playoff, no two-loss team has ever made it. So Oregon, two-loss champ, I think they're out. A multiple-loss Big 12 champ, I think they're out. So then to choose from for that fourth spot, we have to pick from 3 one-loss non-conference champions. All right, so that's a one-loss non-conference champion Washington, a one-loss non-conference champion Georgia, and a one-loss non-conference champion didn't even play for their conference championship, actually, Ohio State. How do we pick this? How do we decide? Well, I think for this point, got to go resume and eye test, the two things that matter to the committee. What does the resume say? When it comes to Washington, they have 4 ranked wins. Okay, 4 ranked wins, one of those being in the top 10 over Oregon. Georgia would have 4 ranked wins, one of those being in the top 10 over Ole Miss. Ohio State, they don't have as many ranked wins, but they do have 2 top 10 wins, one of which being on the road against Notre Dame, one of which being at home against Penn State. And then arguably they have the best loss of this whole group, being to a top 3 Michigan. Okay, now you say they didn't play for the Big Ten championship. Okay, I understand. But still, that resume, I think, still holds some weight. Like, I don't think the 2 top 10 wins is a drastic drop-off from the 4 ranked wins those other teams have. So, where does that leave us? When I look at these resumes, I think you can make an argument for all of them. We just made the argument for Ohio State. Those 2 top 10 wins should hold a ton of weight. Their loss should hold a ton of weight. They have the best loss of this whole group. Georgia, Washington, the same amount of ranked wins. They both have a top 10 loss in this case. Like, they both played for the conference championship. So what I think you would do then is you look to the eye test. And the eye test is hard to quantify based on the fact that these games haven't actually happened yet. So it would be something to guess at, I suppose, at how those games would turn out. But again, going back to what we know already about the committee. The committee is telling us right now they really value the way that Georgia has looked to this point in the season. And if we find ourselves in this scenario, I think Georgia, as a one-loss non-conference champion, depending on how that loss looks to Alabama, I think they'd be the team that gets in. Now, you could go down the rabbit hole and say, well, if Ohio State gets blown out by Michigan and Georgia gets blown out by Alabama and Washington loses by 3 to Oregon, maybe they find their way in. But again, I'm going back to chalk kind of holding here and assuming they all lose by a touchdown to whoever their losses to, Washington to Oregon, Ohio State to Michigan, and Georgia to Bama. If it's a one-loss or a one-touchdown loss across the board, I think Georgia, and honestly, let's just be real here, the good faith that I think that the Georgia brand has, right or wrong with the committee, I think we see a little Georgia bump and we find them as that 4th team in that scenario. So things are getting weird right now in this playoff scenario segment, and we got one more for you, but I appreciate y'all that have already submitted some scenarios. If you haven't yet, go ahead and do that. We'll get to those next week at this time, and we'll have ourselves a good time breaking it down. Last one here, and this scenario got its own page. Like, I mean, we did a full-on break it down. I felt like I was solving a math problem as we go through these. Justin Armstrong. Like, some men, they just want to watch the world burn, and Justin is one of those guys. He hit us up and said, okay, here's the deal. Bama, one-loss conference champ. A lot of these involve Bama. I don't think that's coincidental because that is really the chaos block that could set this whole thing off. One-loss conference champ, Alabama, from the SEC. Louisville, a one-loss conference champ from the ACC. Okay, so they beat Florida State in the conference title game. Here's where it gets real crazy. My man Justin says Iowa wins the Big Ten. So they beat an undefeated, let's say, a Michigan or Ohio State. We'll get to that here in a second. Then Oregon. He kept this neat and tidy for us, so thank you, Justin. Oregon's a one-loss conference champ from the Pac-12. And then similar to our last scenario, he has Texas somehow dropping a game here and the Big 12 champ being a multiple-loss team. So you got a multiple-loss Big 10 champ, a multiple-loss Big 12 champ, and then you got Louisville out of the ACC as a one-loss conference champ. So let's just break this down the best we can. I think Oregon, again, based on what the committee has told us to this point, they like them on the eye test. I think with the resume and freezing their wins with a ranked win, say what you want about Colorado. They were top 20 at the time. Say what you want about Utah. They were top 20 at the time as well, and they beat them on the road. That probably helps the resume. Obviously, if they beat Washington, that boosts the resume even more. I don't see a way where you leave them out in this scenario. Alabama, if you beat the number 1 team in the country in Georgia, in this scenario, you're in. Okay, so those 2 are locked. So who's left? a one-loss non-conference champion Michigan or Ohio State. Ohio State has the best resume there for the Big Ten, so we'll talk about that here in a second. A one-loss non-conference champion Georgia and a one-loss conference champ Louisville. I think those are the teams that you pick from. You also, I guess, have a one-loss non-conference champ Washington. I would take a one-loss Michigan or Ohio State, and we'll talk about that in a second here. Like I said, I'll take those teams, eye test and resume, over what Washington's done to this point. So, I think Louisville, like here's my thing. The committee, every single year, regardless of who's a part of it, the college football playoff values conference championships. If Louisville wins the ACC with one loss and they're a Power 5 one-loss conference champ, there would be riots in Louisville, Kentucky if they don't find their way into the college football playoff. Like I think that would just go against everything that we've known about this college football playoff structure if you leave a one-loss Louisville out of the dance. Now, I understand we're going to have a conversation here about eye test versus resume because Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, all three of those teams probably are better than Louisville, just to be real. If they were to play tomorrow, I think you'd probably take Georgia, or you take Ohio State, or you take Louisville, or you take Michigan over Louisville. So that leaves us with Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State. I think Ohio State has a better resume than Michigan at this point in time. Let's just call it, for the sake of tidiness for this conversation, let's say Ohio State is the team that makes it to the Big Ten championship game with one loss. Ohio State's resume would then be 3 top 10 wins: Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan. Georgia, they've got a really solid resume. They would have, I think, 4 ranked wins at this point, 1 top 10 win, but the resume and the eye test for Ohio State, assuming they beat Michigan, would make them that last team to get in. Now, going back to this, that would be Oregon, Bama, Louisville, Ohio State in that predicament with those 4. If you're pushing back on Louisville, I understand, because we will find out now, if we get this scenario, how much you want to value eye test over resume. Because eye test, far and away, Georgia would get in over Louisville. Resume, the conference champion thing, I think would ultimately be the one that keeps them in. So those are the playoff scenarios that y'all brought to us, and we appreciate y'all doing so. We want to unpack this every single week on Big Picture Wednesday. So get those in via Twitter. I mean, you can Instagram those, DM me to me as well, at Judy Piquel. But let me know what y'all think about these different playoff scenarios. It gets weird. It's going to get weirder here as we get through this rivalry weekend. But it feels like every single Selection Sunday, we sit down, we know what to expect, and we get what we expect when it comes to those top 4. So that's how we think those scenarios will play out. But a lot of weird ahead of us, and a lot of weird I'm sure that we're going to have to talk about here going forward, especially after this weekend. Trey, any objections to any of those? I know we were just doing like out loud long division. Any objections to the way that whole thing was shaping up? I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Anything you want to talk about there?
You know, I think it's all extremely accurate there, but I think I'm with the good citizens of Louisville, Kentucky here, and I think that if they were to go win this ACC title, they probably do get left out, and I think that's a travesty. This is a team I got to watch a few weeks ago. This is a college football playoff deserving team. I know they struggled, against Virginia, and you worry about, Jack Plummer's status if he's able to have that takeover moment against a team like Florida State. If they were to go on and make the playoff, if they could have any success there. But I like that Louisville highlight. I think that's a team that is starting to get their credit, but maybe hasn't gotten enough of that to this point. JD, you brought up eye test versus resume. What is more important to you? I mean, is the eye test, in your opinion? We saw Florida State play Clemson this year. We saw Texas beat Alabama. We went up to Ohio State, saw them defeat Penn State. You've seen these teams in person, but you also know the resumes of an Oregon, of a Washington, of a Louisville. What's more important to you?
That's a great question. I think on Selection Sunday, the eye test needs to be the differentiator, because there's something to be said for controlling what you can control. And like Michigan, the resume they have, some of it's their fault from years ago and not scheduling the right pieces. Some of it's like, hey, man, like we just don't have other teams in the Big Ten holding up their end of the bargain. We'd love to play a ranked Indiana. We'd love to play a ranked Nebraska. And I'm sure those teams love to be ranked as well. But so I think the resume itself is a little bit dependent on the rest of your conference. And that's why we're talking about Texas right now being potentially on the outside looking in, and they're a number 7 team in the country. And it's like, well, hey, the Big 12, nobody else has really held up their end of the deal to help us get a little bit more juice to push up to this college football playoff conversation. So I think it's fair to be upset about resumes 110%. That's why they play the games. That's why college football is what it is. But I would also say the eye test is something where you control the controllables, and we get a better gauge for, what would make a good college football playoff, which isn't the point of it. It's not to be a product, but I do think when you're assessing what are the best 4 teams, eye test has to be heavily factored in.
Yeah, and you said, it's not necessarily about the product or the matchup, but, typically even in a year where Cincinnati makes the playoff, their quarterback Desmond Ridder is going to sell tickets. He's going to put eyeballs on that game. So I think there is a star power element to it, if nothing else. And, we got a game to talk about here. Some might call it the game. But, JD, before we move on, Florida State.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there? We talk about Florida State, I think, at the office more than any other team that's been in the top 4 in these rankings. Team without a quarterback now. A team that had struggles before that, though. Where are you at on Florida State right now?
Yeah, I think the reason we're talking about them, too, is just how much variance it seems like they have week to week. And you would imagine that will probably become more and more of a talking point as we get into this backup quarterback situation with Rodemaker. I think the thing with Florida State is similar to what we just said with the eye test and the resume. The great part about Florida State is they don't have to worry about resume and eye test if they can just go undefeated. So I guess maybe they do worry about resume, but I guess what I'm saying is as long as you have that 0 in the loss column, you kind of just turn the volume down on every other conversation. Like, hey, at this point, there's nothing you can say whether – like, it's kind of the same thing with Cincinnati. Like, they were in the dance. They were undefeated. They had a resume that was strong enough to get them in. But, men lie, women lie, but 0 losses in that L column, I done lied to you. So I think that's kind of the thing to watch for Florida State, obviously, is if they can get there unscathed. Now, the situation could be curious is if they do catch an L before the ACC title game, so this week against Florida, how does that resume look? Then you have to start talking about the resume and say, well, I guess the win against Duke was nice, the LSU win was nice, but I think that would make me very, very nervous if I'm a Seminole fan. Like you said, too, like no Jordan Travis. Does that impact the way the committee feels about them? It shouldn't, but does it? Like, it's a whole new group. So I'm curious, Trey. I'm curious.
I want to hear, what the comments got to say about this one, too, here. Because this is the last 14 playoff we get, JD. This is, truly a struggle to get to play playoff games. And I think, get the 4 best teams in there would be my opinion. But, I know how this works. I know they have a formula, they have a system. And, when you do have a 0 in the loss column, you're probably going to get in if you're a Power 5 school. Maybe even if you're not a Power 5 school. But let's move on to some of these matchups. Maybe the matchup of the weekend here, JD.
Yeah, man. 100% we will. But, Trey, that's a tremendous thought process and a tremendous thing to watch here as we move into this big-time rivalry weekend slate with a little sunshine showdown. Some Desmond Ridder strays in the chat here. You hate to see it, but nonetheless, we press on. Enormous game this weekend in Ann Arbor. We've already given you our prediction for it, given you our preview for it. So if you haven't yet watched that, would encourage you to do so after you watch this video or this live segment. Make sure you subscribe. We appreciate y'all so much in advance for doing so. But when it comes to the game, there is so much passion and so much emotion and so many storylines on the outside of this thing heading into this one, as there always is with a rivalry game, but especially Michigan, Ohio State. Like, there's going to be some extra juice on the back end of this thing. There's going to be some aftermath that we got to kind of unpack together when it comes to this game. So what I want to do right now is for us to sort of unpack each result, an Ohio State win or a Michigan win, and sort of get ahead of this conversation for what's maybe real, what shouldn't be talked about, what's overreactionary when it comes to how this game could look. So let's start with what we predicted. And Ohio State fans, y'all appreciated that we predicted this one because we've been ice cold on picking your Buckeyes this week, and this year, and we don't back down from it. But let's say Ohio State does lose its football game, because I think that's the scenario that could be the most doomsday-ish and have the most overreaction thought around it. There's going to be people, if Ohio State loses the 3rd one in a row, Ryan Day loses his 3rd in a row against Michigan, that say, you know what? Ryan Day is not our guy. We're out on Ryan Day, selling our stock. I want him out. For those that watch college football, for those that know what Ryan Day has done to this point, that is absolute ridiculousness. My man is 54-6 as a head coach. 54-6. You can say what you want about being born on third base. You still have to drive the car after you get handed the keys to a Ferrari. Like, we've seen other operations have, just as much handed to them and drive it into the ground. There's something to be said for keeping something at cruising altitude. So I would also ask this: if you don't think Ryan Day is the guy to get you over the hump with a 54-6 record, who do you want to go get? You want to go grab Urban Meyer off the big noon set? I don't blame you. I'm sure that would be tremendous. But, assuming that's not a reality, who are you going to go get? I don't think there's somebody better than Ryan Day right now to be the guy at Ohio State. And the thing that I would say, too, is we shouldn't just discount the fit that Ryan Day is at Ohio State. Like, especially in college football, it takes a little something extra to be the head coach, to be the right head coach at your university. And having the right guy and the right fit that gets what your school, what your fan base, what your program is all about, you can't overstate the importance of that. Because we're seeing now at different places, guys that maybe we question are a fit or aren't a fit, that has a tremendous ripple effect. Like Lincoln Riley is the most obvious one right now. There are people questioning, hey, is he a fit for the head coach at USC? Is LA the right spot for him? Is USC the right spot for him? I don't know. I'm not here to tell you it's not. We talk about that with Jake Olson tomorrow actually on the show, so tune in. But like that's something we're questioning. They're questioning the fit. You never question the fit with Ryan Day. You question, can he beat Michigan? You question, can he do that consistently? Because that's the standard. But to understand what Ohio State's about, Ryan Day gets that to a T. Jimbo Fisher wasn't a fit at A&M. Tremendous resume, could recruit the heck out of a class, wasn't a fit at A&M. It is what it is. Now, Steve Sarkisian, he's a fit at Texas. He is the right amount of, I think, star power for a place like Austin. He knows how to recruit in state. He has the right emphasis on culture. Like all those things make for Steve Sarkisian being a fit at Texas. Ryan Day, make no mistake about it, he is a fit at Ohio State. Look at the guys he's developed and put in the NFL. Look at the way they've recruited. Ryan Day is a fit at Ohio State. Say what you want about third base, he is a fit. So to say that if they lose this game, he should be fired, he should be on the hot seat, it's all overreactionary. Don't listen to it. It'll eventually subside, and we'll get back to this game next year, and we'll have that same conversation, and if Ryan Day can get it done or not, again, if they lose that game. Now, on the other side of things, if Michigan loses this game, the optics will be what they are, man. Like, there will be a lot of talk around sign stealing and a lot of question marks around the last couple of years, probably a lot of forgiveness for Ryan Day saying, well, hey, they cheated the last 2 years, and that's why they won, and, like, that's going to be a talking point. Is it fair or not? I don't know. We'll talk about that and our thoughts on that here in a second. But there's also, I would say, a fair amount of people, if Michigan wins this football game, that will say, well, proves nothing. They still cheated the last 2 years. So let's kind of take that with a grain of salt. But the more important, I think, talking point here is going to be the Michigan faithful saying, well, we lost this game because Jim Harbaugh wasn't on the sideline. That's what people will say. Now, we can probably deduce how this game goes from an eye test perspective if it would matter. If Michigan gets blown out by 3 touchdowns, doesn't matter who you got coaching the game, all right? They were the better team on that day. But my pushback on the, well, he wasn't on the sideline, so that's why we lost, thought would be, well, one, like, is Jim Harbaugh throwing a pass? Is Jim Harbaugh rushing the passer? Is Jim Harbaugh stopping the run? It's a big deal to have your coach on the sideline, but just what we said about the sign stealing stuff, you still got to play ball. If it works in your favor with the sign stealing for Michigan and kind of defending that whole process and that thought around it, it's got to work the other way when you don't have your head guy on the sideline. You still got to play football. Now, there will be some big calls to be had in this game, you would imagine, for Sharon Moore, but the impact of it, to say it's why you win or lose a football game, I have a hard time 100% getting behind that because also they've done it without him to this point in the year. There's people in pockets of Michigan, conversations saying, well, they've already done it without Jim Harbaugh to this point in the year. Doesn't matter. You can't say it doesn't matter going into the game and then after the game say, well, we didn't have our head coach. So we got to kind of pick a side here. And if you're on the Jim Harbaugh isn't there, so that's why we're going to lose train, ride that thing all the way to the other side. But I don't think it's a thing where you can make that the excuse or the talking point after the game. Because I would also say, well, we took the suspension, did we not, if we're Michigan? Like we said, okay, that's the punishment. We don't want to fight back anymore for reasons that, maybe we'll discuss on another show at some point when we get more information. But, like, they took the suspension. So you can't say we were suspended for the wrong reasons, we should have been on the sideline, and then be upset and call that the talking point and be that the excuse if you end up losing this football game. So that's how we feel about that. The optics would be what they are. I'm not here to talk about sign stealing. I just think the Harbaugh thing, if that's their excuse, I would push back on that if I'm an Ohio State fan. Now, Ohio State, man, this is where it gets good. If you beat Michigan this year and Ryan Day is able to exercise the last couple of seasons and the last couple of games against Michigan, I think we got to change the way we talk about Ryan Day. Because we talk about Ryan Day as being one of the best coaches in college football and his win percentage and all that. That's true. I think we got to talk about him as being one of the best program builders in college football. Because what it would mean is Ryan Day adapted his philosophy, changed his way of doing things at Ohio State from one year to the next, adopted his philosophy to his roster, and was able to then reinvent themselves, climb up the mountain, and conquer what they weren't able to conquer previously. In short, Ryan Day adapted. All the best coaches in the country, all the best minds in college football, Saban, Smart, they adapt. And not to dunk on Lincoln Riley here, but we're seeing right now Lincoln Riley refusing to adapt and having issues and struggling because of it on the defensive side of the ball. Ryan Day, we forget, there was a point in time where their defense had real issues. Last year they had some issues, but even the year before that, they were getting gashed by Oregon. So what does Ryan Day do? He doesn't say, well, let's see how this plays out. Well, I'm just an offensive guy. He doesn't just, hide on his side of the ball. He says, you know what? We got issues. I'm going to go get the best defensive coordinator I can find in Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State. We're going to bring him in, and we're going to be better on defense. And they were better on defense last year. They're even better from the year before this year. He's adapting, and it's paying dividends. And if it pays the ultimate dividend this season, again, I think you got to put Ryan Day right up there with all the best in the game. You already do right now, but I think even higher on that list is where I'd put Ryan Day, should they find a way to get it done against Michigan. I would also say this. Whenever you adapt, whenever you kind of get the recipe right the first time, it's a lot easier to get it right the next time. So I think we would feel a little bit different about Ryan Day being the head coach for years to come at Ohio State and the success they could have, saying, okay, they can win whatever roster they get. Like going into the season, it was, well, there's no C.J. Stroud. We'll see how they look. That was how I felt, at least. I felt like they were really good, but I was wondering about Kyle McCord. I still wonder about Kyle McCord. But if they get it done, I don't question the recipe because the recipe's been proven. It might take some time to get it right every single year, but it creates this thought and kind of illuminates us that, hey, Ryan Day, even though he's an offensive guy, they can win in multiple ways. They can beat Michigan regardless of who they have on their roster because Ryan Day knows how to put together different recipes. So if they win, the conversation around Ryan Day better be just as loud as if they lose. I want to make sure we have that on the record there. Now, Michigan, if they win, there should be a lot of apologies for the slander of Jim Harbaugh and the job that he's done there being totally just due to the way that they've, cheated and what went wrong with Connor Stallions. Like, we're not here to defend Connor Stallions. We're not here to defend cheating. If he cheated, that's wrong. If it helped them, that's an advantage, 100%. But again, we get stuck on this thought that if you cheated by having signs or by stealing signs and doing the whole sign stealing thing, I have a difficult time just pinning that 100% as the reason why Michigan was so good the last couple of seasons. If they beat Ohio State this week, I think you can kind of drop the mic and say, okay, all right, yeah, actually maybe it is the double-digit NFL players. Maybe it is the way that Jim Harbaugh built this thing. And Trey and I were talking about this very same thing before the show, and I thought Trey brought up a tremendous point. We'll talk about it here in a second with him. Like, how does that make you feel about Jim Harbaugh and his future at Michigan? Because, I've heard this point a couple different places, but like Jim Harbaugh being able to be off the sideline, his team still be dominant and still beat Ohio State. How much he's built it up, that thing is essentially running itself. If I'm a Michigan fan, my feeling would be I would hate for Jim Harbaugh to leave, but if he does leave, and we got Sharon Moore running the show, yeah, there's a sense of like, hey, we still probably got to see a little bit more proof of concept to feel amazing about it. But you would feel a lot better by winning this game with no Jim Harbaugh, with his system in place, with a system that Sharon Moore is going to continue to keep in place, than if you lose and he ends up going to the NFL next year anyway. Like, that's, I think, a very interesting conversation that we're going to have here in a minute. But like, at the end of the day, there should be a ton of credit to Jim Harbaugh if they win this game. Because to be clear, they have always, everybody that's on this roster right now, to the best of my knowledge, was recruited in a class that was ranked behind Ohio State. Okay, since 2020, they've been behind Ohio State on the recruiting trail. And so if they beat them for the third year in a row, what does that say about the development at Michigan and the way they've developed that roster? Heck, what does it say about the culture to endure all the weird circumstances that they've had this year? I think it would speak volumes to the coach Jim Harbaugh is, would speak volumes to the culture they have, and it would just, I think, hopefully silence all the sign-stealing nonsense about, well, that was why they won, because we never bought into that. I know it probably is going to be a thing where there's a portion of the crowd that's just going to, die on that hill, and that's fine, but I think this game would hopefully be a little bit of proof in the pudding for Michigan. And if they lose, if Michigan does lose, I understand you're going to point back to the sign stealing, and that's fine. Every right to do that, and it'll be something to talk about. Again, the aftermath of this game, there'll be a lot to unpack, but I cannot wait for it. Cannot wait for us to finally get some answers and to unpack some of that aftermath. And also get a gauge for the college football playoff, hopefully, based on one of those teams potentially winning the Big Ten. Trey, I mentioned to you in that segment, like, very interesting thought of, okay, well, if we beat Ohio State without Jim Harbaugh if we're Michigan. The thought would then be, I think, a little bit more security. And yeah, we'd hate to see him go, hate to see him be in the NFL, but I think we're okay. But I think we have a formula here that we can work with. What do you think about that? Because you brought that up. I thought it was on the money.
Well, I appreciate the kind words there, JD, but, the guy that usually sits in this chair, Nick Brake, big movie fan. He's a movie stan, you might call him. And, sometimes you see movies, they do their regular trailer, and every now and then, this time of the year particularly, you see an extended trailer. You get, an extra cut.
Wow.
I think that's what we've seen this year with Michigan. I mean, we've seen, not one, not two, three. I mean, we've seen Michigan without Jim Harbaugh multiple times against multiple schemes on the road, at home. If I'm a Michigan fan, I feel comfortable with just about anybody at the helm. And, it's crazy to look at this locker room. I think they might be the only ones that have no idea this stuff's going on right now because they're unaffected. Didn't look amazing this weekend. Maybe they're looking ahead to Ohio State. Maybe some of that is the Stein stealing, the Jim Harbaugh stuff is affecting this team a little bit at least. But, if you're Michigan right now, if you're Sharon Moore in prime position to take this program over, if Jim Harbaugh was not to be the head coach any longer, I don't think there's a need to worry now. What does it look like in 5 years when the recruiting catches up? When you're not defeating Ohio State 2, maybe 3 times in a row.
Sure.
When you don't have this kind of roster because you don't have Jim Harbaugh to go out and get a guy like J.J. McCarthy or a guy like Jaden Daniels or Jaden Davis, or whoever that might be. But at this point, JD, I think if you're a Michigan fan, you've seen that extended trailer, and I think you feel pretty good about it.
All that's to be said, if Jim Harbaugh were to, for some reason, not be the guy next year for Michigan, that is a 30-second head coaching search in Ann Arbor, or however long it takes to walk down the hall and say, hey, Sharon Moore, you're actually the head coach now. Like, there's no national search. There's no, we're going to go talk to this guy, that guy, this coordinator, this head coach. Like, it's Sharon Moore no matter what, draft day style.
If Sharon Moore even wants it. I mean, this guy has put himself in such a good position. Maybe he has even higher aspirations, but
shoot, man,
this is his job if he wants it, JD.
Has to be, man. I'm excited to see. Here's the thing. You mentioned the extended trailer. We could get an extended cut of the post-game interviews from Sharon Moore because the emotion after the Penn State win, like, that was Penn State. If you go beat the rival, like, I'm excited to see what that looks like if they do it in Ann Arbor over, the team that they want to beat. Be good. Be good stuff. Be good theater, if you will.
Oh, yeah. Well, and on the other side of that coin, JD, because you said something that I wholeheartely agree with, and I don't think enough people are talking about, Ryan Day. If he wins this game, I mean, let's keep that energy. I think that phrase is, tossed around a lot nowadays, but this is a guy that has coached in a national championship game, and I don't have the number prepared here, JD. How many active head coaches have coached for a national championship? 5, maybe 6. Mac Brown.
List. It's a small list.
Jimbo Fisher, no one. It's
sure.
This is a guy that has coached for a national championship within this decade. He hasn't beat Michigan the last 2 years, but to kind of compare it, and I hate to bring up Clemson again here. I think this is maybe the millionth time this show, but following that program growing up, Dabo Swinney lost to South Carolina 5 times in a row. And I think you sit there and you say, well, JD, that's the most important thing for this program. We got to beat our in-state rival, South Carolina. But then you zoom out, and you look at the potential of this program, the classes that they were getting at that time, the seasons that they were putting together, top 5 win over Florida State, top 5 win over Virginia Tech. The final year they lose to South Carolina that year. The next year, they're in a BCS bowl game. The year after that, they're in the college football playoff. Then they're winning CFP national championships. This is a guy that I think a lot of fans maybe would have moved on from because he had lost 5 straight games to the rival. And while that's not good, you look at the bigger picture here. You look at Ryan Day's bigger picture. This is a guy that's already coached in a national championship game before losing twice in a row to Michigan. We know what's capable of this program under Ryan Day's leadership. Our own Urban Meyer, a program coming out later today on our channel as well here, he highlights often on that show how much this rivalry game not just means, to college football, but to the state of Ohio, to the people that, have to really be in the thick of this rivalry. It's important, 100%. But, in the grand scheme of things, a guy like Ryan Day, that can take you to a national championship, that can take you to, the playoff year after year, expanded playoffs starting next year as well. I don't think that there's anybody even remotely close. And, Brian Hartline, obviously you need good coordinators to make all this possible, and maybe he is the guy that Ohio State fans would immediately point to and say, blank check, let's move on, this is our guy, if he was willing to do that. But like you said, JD, who are you going to turn to? Because Ryan Day is one of those 5-6 head coaches that has coached for a national championship, and while he's lost twice in a row to Michigan here, I think he deserves a little bit more credit.
Let's just not – college football is the best sport on earth, but it feels like with the transfer portal and with, the way that you can go out and just change your roster so drastically and go and get the best staff and the resources, like there's the least amount of patience, I think, than any other sport. Like we expect results right away. And so Ryan Day lost the last couple of years. Yeah, not ideal. You hate to see that, especially if you're an Ohio State fan. But at the exact same time, you were a field goal away from beating Georgia and probably playing and winning a national championship in Los Angeles. So, I think I'm with you, Trey. I really do believe there is nobody better for the job than Ryan Day. And if they do win, like let's keep that same volume around what we were going to say about him being not the guy. Like, okay, well then let's buy into what he did do, because he did it with, and no knock on Kyle McCord, like he's not Justin Fields, he's not Dwayne Haskins, he's not C.J. Stroud, so I think that would have to be talked about.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And a friend of the program, their Program as well, Ryan Day.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But how about a team that's trying to three-peat, JD?
Let's do it, man. Yeah, let's get into it. What's good with the good folks in Athens, Georgia. Folks, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed. Also, make sure you get in the chat here. We got this segment, and we're going to get to some of y'all's thoughts and questions, concerns around the college football landscape here before we jump into our Thanksgiving show tomorrow. Tomorrow, there will not be a question and answer period of the show as it is premiered, on the show itself. So we're not going to be live. We'll still have the show going on for you at the exact same time. If you have a question we don't get to, I'll be doing a question and answer today on my Instagram page. So at JD Pickell, follow me there. Going to throw up the question sticker as soon as we get off the air up here. Usually do that on Fridays. We'll do it today on Wednesdays since we don't have that question and answer period tomorrow, and we got a lot of ball being played on Friday. So follow me there, get at me there, and we'll chop it up and have a good time. As Trey just alluded to, Georgia's trying to three-peat. They're going for a third in a row. They've had a lot of success too. They're undefeated, number one team in the country. Been rolling the last couple of weeks. The spot gets bigger and they get better. Rolled through Ole Miss, rolled through Tennessee, Missouri even before both those teams. So what is the pulse right now internally and the fan base as well in Athens, Georgia for the Georgia Bulldogs? We'll talk about it right now. Again, make sure you're subscribed. We appreciate y'all so much for being dialed in. Hey, just the same way that Georgia is throttling towards 3 national titles, we are throttling towards 200K subscribers. So Georgia Bulldog faithful, we appreciate y'all being a part of this. Subscribe here. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at JD Pickell. We appreciate y'all so much for that. So you talk about the success, and you talk about what Georgia's done. You talk about, all of the things that are ahead of Georgia. And it's hard to not feel a little bit like, well, is Georgia getting complacent? Is Georgia resting on their laurels? Does the new pieces here at Georgia, do they get it? Are they all the way bought in? Are they the same standard of focus that we've seen from this team in the past? And I think from what we've seen from this team, and from what we've seen on the field and from what we've heard behind closed doors from different things we've been exposed to from Kirby Smart's, halftime speeches, that cinematic recap this past weekend of the Tennessee game from the Georgia creative team, like Georgia, in my mind, the pulse of the program there is attack mode. And what I mean by that is Georgia is in no way, shape, or form taking their foot off the gas. And there's a couple of reasons to that. The first of which being a lot of the new pieces here, Kirby Smart's done a tremendous job of communicating to them, hey, you don't inherit anything. The rings that you have on your finger, those are because you were a backup. You didn't earn those in the same way that some of those guys before you earned those. The guys that upheld the standard, the guys that got this G to where it's supposed to be, to where we expect it to be. And to be clear, Georgia, in terms of returning production going into this season, they were 80th in the country. 70% was back on defense. Right around half was back on offense. So what does that tell us? You had a lot of guys now that Kirby Smart was telling you have to earn it. And the reason why I say they're in attack mode is, one, because of what I just said, new guys trying to earn it. We'll talk about that more. But also just the overall temperament that Kirby Smart refuses to not allow this team to have. Like, you heard that cinematic recap, and Kirby Smart is shouting, and all these players are shouting, nobody's safe. Talking about the team on the other sideline. Nobody's safe. People are saying, well, Georgia, they got a bullseye on their back. People are trying to take down the Dogs, and Kirby Smart, every time someone brings that notion to him, he kind of flips it around and says, no. We won't be hunted. We are hunting at the University of Georgia. We are the enforcers. We're the top dog, and we're not trying to keep anything. We're trying to go after everybody. And what I would say is there is nobody better than setting standards currently in college football, and nobody better than getting their team focused and engineered to believe a certain thing than Kirby Smart. Because we talked to Darnell Washington last year at the national championship game, and you heard this in other interviews from different players, but we got it with Darnell Washington. We asked him, like, hey, why are y'all so good? Is basically what we asked him. Hey, when things kind of get crazy for y'all in that fourth quarter against Ohio State, it's back and forth, why were y'all able to do what you did and finish that game that way? And he very clearly, almost as if it was rehearsed, as if it was written on a wall somewhere, maybe on a T-shirt somewhere. I'm imagining behind closed doors in Athens. He said, we fall back on our traits. We fall back on who we are as a team. That was true then. I believe it's just as true right now. And there's that traits, that's one, so that's who they are internally. And I think there's a lot of things you could describe them as, which is attacking, aggressive, physical, full speed every play. The way that Brock Bowers and his catapult numbers, from what I'm told, are just the same, whether it's practice or whether it's a game. So that's freakish one for Brock Bowers too. I don't think that's a wild, disparity when it comes to the way that Georgia practices. I'm not saying everyone has Brock Bowers numbers, but I am saying they are full speed all the time. They're doing physical practices and Bloody Tuesday during the week. They're beating the heck out of each other. Like, that is just the identity of who they are. They're that way behind closed doors. They're that way on the field. Now, also, I think Kirby Smart does a tremendous job fueling this team with the right amount of external juice, because we know the internal standard. But I think the way that he takes the outside noise and kind of serves it up on a platter in just the right way, and I can't prove this, but this is the way that I feel. I think they have this feeling of, well, nobody really thinks we're that good. Nobody really thinks that y'all are this. Nobody's really picking y'all to do that. Hey, you haven't done anything yet. There's that great Kobe Bryant interview. Rest in peace. Kobe Bryant's asked after, I believe it was an NBA Finals Game 2. I said, hey, you're up 2-0. How do you feel? You don't look like you're smiling too much. He goes, job's not finished. What's there to be happy about? That's the same, I think, temperament Kirby Smart is implementing into this team. Job's not finished. We haven't done nothing yet. You're undefeated. You want to think that you're all this, you're all that. You're going to go play Bama in Atlanta in a couple of weeks, and they cannot wait to get their shot at y'all. They cannot wait. You want to celebrate right now? You want to think you're all that? I don't think Kirby Smart's allowing any of that. So the reason why that's so dangerous is you can message anything like that. I mean, you can say whatever you want as a head coach. But if your players take to it is the real question. The thing with Kirby Smart, he has created a process and created an operation in Athens, Georgia, to where the results speak for themselves. The buy-in itself should be there because of what the results are. Like, it's much easier for me to buy into a team mantra and a process and a way of doing things when we've won 2 national championships, as opposed to if we've struggled to make bowl games the last couple of years. Like, which one am I going to buy into? Which coach am I going to listen to and just kind of take at face value? I promise you it's Kirby Smart and what they've done there. So at this point now, the brand is almost running itself to a degree. Now, don't get it twisted. The internal leadership and the leadership within that staff is pushing it up the hill. But to just dismiss the thought process that Kirby Smart, I think, is pushing towards these guys and the fact that they have that chip on their shoulder, I think, the way they look for it, that's dangerous. So why do they get better? Why does Georgia get better every single week, it feels like? Because I think they challenge themselves internally, because they do that Bloody Tuesday, because they have that standard. So as a whole, man, what's the pulse for Georgia? Attack mode. There is no we're trying to keep the crown. There is no we're trying to go for 3. It is this team trying to go for 1. It is this new group at different, important positions at OC, at quarterback, like these new pieces trying to push it up the hill and earn their part of it. They talk about eating off the floor. They're all eating off the floor right now, trying to find themselves back in that national title spot. But as long as they stay in attack mode, I would be nervous if I'm the rest of college football. So for Georgia, attack mode is the pulse. It's going to be that way all the way through the tape for the Dogs. Truly believe that. Trey, what do you think, man? Georgia's rolling. Feels like they're dangerous, just as they always are, but it feels like there is a very real chase factor to the way that they play. You know what I mean? Like I don't think Georgia is in any way, shape, or form a complacent football team. And that's scary because they're so talented. Anytime you take away the complacency and you just go back to talent and you go to strong culture, like, what are your thoughts on Georgia there, Trey?
Georgia is such an interesting team, JD, because I think at times they're almost underrated. At times, maybe we're talking about them a little bit too favorably. I think as a whole, you look at this body of work, this is the most dominant team in college football this year. And, we talked about that CFP poll early on. What's the criteria? How are they doing this? I think from the jump, Georgia should have been your number one team. You don't want to look at the last 2 years, and this is a different set of people on this committee than the ones that made the poll last year that determined the playoff. You don't want to look to Georgia's national championships to determine what they are this year, because like you said, Kirby's going to iterate that to the locker room every day. You guys haven't earned that. That was last year. That was the year before. And while there's some roster turnover, this is a much different team. But at the end of the day, JD, I think that this Georgia team is so special because they understand that maybe they don't have that element of dominance that these others had. They're not quite the same up front. They're very dominant up front, don't get me wrong, but, they aren't the Georgia of 2022. They aren't the Georgia of 2021. This is a unique team, and I think this year in general we've seen great parity. Alabama is not typically what Alabama is. You look around the rest of the SEC. LSU severely has fallen off. We're seeing certain ACC teams rise. The Pac-12 is back in what's their truly final season here. But JD, what is Georgia? I think at the end of the day, you got to keep it simple until they show you something else. This is the best team in the country, and, I heard a good point on the Andy Staples show earlier this week. I don't know if Alabama is necessarily the matchup that threatens them as much as other teams. I mean, Alabama is going to have to throw the ball to beat Georgia. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that at a high enough clip. Obviously, Jalen Milroe has come on, but, I think matchup-wise, that's probably on paper the best roster you're going to face. I don't think that's the hardest matchup you face, and after that, you're in the playoff, you're in the national championship game. I don't want to say it's going to look like last year against TCU, but I think you find yourselves in one or two favorable matchups here in the playoff if you can get there, if you can get past Bama. And shoot, JD, I don't want to get too far off track here, but I think they probably make it either way. If they wrap it up against Georgia Tech this weekend. What are your thoughts there? Let's say they lose to Alabama in the SEC title game. Obviously, a lot other games are going to unfold here and determine a lot of this. But do you think that the committee is going to be almost dead set on putting Georgia into the playoff if they're undefeated heading to Atlanta?
If they're undefeated heading to Atlanta, I think there's so much that could happen with Florida State being undefeated and Washington being undefeated and potentially a Big Ten champion being undefeated. I think the spots kind of fill up quickly. And if Georgia's on the outside looking in, I wonder if Oregon, or I guess we have the Pac-12 champion undefeated at this point, I worry a little bit about Georgia controlling their own destiny if they lose that game in the SEC championship. I think a one-loss Georgia will be worried. I really do. I see where you're coming from because the eye test, but I'd be curious to see where that would fall because I think there's a lot of ambiguity there, if you will, Trey. We got one ad read here. What do you say we get to some questions? Sound good, Trey?
That sounds phenomenal.
Let's do it, man. Let's absolutely do it. Well, I'd like to tell y'all that the game time, I'll restart that because that was a horrible intro into that. Game time is bringing y'all the hard count today. All right? So here's what we're going to do. Rivalry weekend. A lot of big-time games. If you haven't been to a game just yet this season, this is your last opportunity before a bowl game, so your last time to go see your team at the Big House, the last time to go see Auburn at Jordan-Hare. If you want to be at the game, Game Time is the best way to help you do that. The reason why? Obsessed with helping you save money. So there's not a thing where you're going to find a better deal on a better ticket in a certain row you want to sit in. Because if you find a row or a seat in the same row or section for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. That's crucial. That's big money move. Saving money with Game Time. We appreciate them making that happen. Also, you can wait right up to the day of the event. They have tickets on everything from concerts to comedy events, college football games, most specifically for our audience. You can wait right up till the morning of the game, noon kick. Don't worry about it. Buy a ticket at 9 a.m. You're good to go with 2 taps using the Game Time app, and you will be there. Also, really, really important, no way that you're going to find a seat that you don't enjoy because you can see the view from the seat when you purchase via the Game Time app. So, download tickets without the stress, buy tickets without the stress, rather, with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. This is important now. use code HARDCOUNT for $20 off your first purchase. So $50 ticket, you're a first-time user, redeem code HARDCOUNT, $20 off, bam, $30 ticket. Stealing. So terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code HARDCOUNT, that's HARDCOUNT, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Big Trey. Let's go see what the people are saying here in the live chat, man. What do we got going on with the folks in the chat? Anything worth unpacking when it comes to scenarios? Any questions? What's the latest buzz right now in the chat?
Yeah, it's been a great chat today, and a big shout out to everybody that does get in these comments, that asks questions, that answers these questions. It's just fun to see, the full landscape of college football here. A lot of Georgia talk. Seeing a lot of Michigan talk as well here. I don't see any questions specifically just yet, so guys, be sure to get those in here. I'll ask you one, JD.
Yeah.
What, outside of the game, because obviously that one is going to have the most attention on it this weekend, which of these rivalry games are you going to pay the most close attention to this weekend?
Man, Florida State, Florida, for the impact that would have on either side. If Florida wins that game, they're bowling. Also, the approval rating for Billy Napier, it's kind of been all over the place. I think it skyrockets if they beat Florida State. Then Florida State, they're going in there with their playoff hopes very much so intact. But you're playing a backup quarterback for his first, real action in the swamp. Like, that's going to be a treacherous path to jump into there, Trey. So the impact of that one, I think, is so massive. That's one to watch. And also, talk about getting weird. We have a segment tomorrow with Andy Staples, so I don't want to give it away too much, but things could get weird in the Nebraska-Iowa game. I mean, a lot of families on Thanksgiving are feeding their family well because of the Iowa unders. Anytime you're playing with, a low-scoring team, field position, a lot of punts. You're at Nebraska fighting for bowl eligibility. Iowa already punched their ticket to the Big Ten championship game. Like, you wonder where the psyches are at for both sides and how weird that could be. Nebraska, Iowa, also one to watch in the Heroes game there.
Jonah Hall, a holiday-themed question here. What's going to be your first dinner plate tomorrow, JD?
That's a good one. I want to hear your answer after this, too. Hey, folks, real quick, we're about 10 likes away from 100. Got a tradition of 100 likes before we get off the air. If we could have everybody just hit that thumbs up button under the video, we'd be well over 100, and we'd appreciate y'all tremendously for that. You know what, Trey? I'm a big stuffing fan. And in this particular day of the year, I think we're going to go heavy on the carbs. So we're going to go heavy stuffing. We're going to go heavy mac and cheese. I would love to get on the ham action as well. And then we'll throw some turkey on there for tradition. I think turkey is kind of a hot button for a lot of people when it comes to Thanksgiving. Doesn't have the most flavor, but what are you doing here, Trey, when it comes to the old turkey and the plate when it comes to that first one?
Well, that threw me way off there. JD, ham.
Little ham action.
The primary protein. Wow.
The triple option of Thanksgiving, if you will.
Wow, that's a good one. Yeah, it's tough, and I'm interested to hear how your family typically does their turkey on Thanksgiving. But I think I'm going to go with the turkey itself. My uncle, Chris, fries a turkey every year. And if you guys haven't had fried turkey, I know it's kind of the more popular, trendy way to do it nowadays. So maybe you have. But, just the juiciness, the flavor in the turkey. Ooh. Never had a Cajun one. Heard about the Cajun one this year. But I'm going to go with the turkey. Love the stuffing as well. And heavy debate. We live in the South. We're from the South. Mac and cheese is not present at my Thanksgiving, although I don't know if the mac and cheese makes its rounds there.
Is that a Southern thing?
I think there's debate if mac and cheese should be allowed at the table or not.
I would think mac and cheese would be a more Southern thing. No? Am I off base there, Trey? That is news to me. That is news to me when it comes to the Thanksgiving conversation. I would have thought in talk of playoff scenarios. I would have thought mac and cheese would be an auto bid. I would have thought undefeated conference champ, one-loss conference champ, doesn't matter. Mac and cheese is in the South,
Who else is making your Thanksgiving playoff here, JD? I know the stuffing.
That's a great question.
Stuffing's 1-1.
Stuffing probably gets in there as a 4 seed, to be honest with you. I think turkey has to be in. Like, turkey being in is like an SEC champ. They're probably in. And then when it comes to Big Ten play, man, I'm trying to think of another heavy hitter when it comes to when it comes to Thanksgiving. You know what? This is also a little bit off script. Cinnamon rolls. Not cinnamon rolls, but cinnamon-flavored, dinner rolls, little crescent rolls. I think those are just a can't miss, in my opinion. Oh. What about you? You got one for us?
Well, I don't, but I do have to bring up the desserts. Because, I don't, if you guys do pie or what the go-to is for you all at home as well. The pumpkin pie that I indulge in on Thanksgiving. Cannot beat it. They have to make my playoff. I don't know the rest, maybe stuffing. I'm with you there. Maybe some mashed potatoes. Keep it easy. But
love that.
Pumpkin pie is most certainly.
You're so right. Okay, I'm gonna switch mine. I'm gonna switch apple pie in or pumpkin pie either.
Okay. We got some pecan.
Any pie gets in without the rules. Hey Trey, what do we say we get one more question in here before we make our way out of this thing?
Let's do it. I saw one about Texas. A little bit more broad here. What is Texas' future? They're moving to the SEC, JD. Let's just start right now. Do they make the playoff in your opinion? What do they do in the playoff? And what is the future of this program? Maybe the next 2 years as they enter the SEC.
Man, I go back and forth so much on Texas, to be honest with you, Trey. Like, I think midway through the season, I was like, hey, Texas, they're rolling. They're making the playoff. They got the head-to-head. They're going to be in the dance. Quinn Ewers goes down, and I just felt like we saw a different sense of urgency from Texas in those couple of games where they get ahead with Malik Murphy, and then they kind of let teams back in the game. They play with their food. And so, like, the stock that I was buying in Texas, I wasn't selling my stock, all of it. I was selling portions of it to kind of hedge my bet a little bit. Right now, with Quinn Ewers back and the way they're playing, I'm going to go ahead and just assume that Georgia wins the SEC. And if that happens, I think Texas finds their way in. Like, the only interesting thing is where Alabama and Texas get into this conversation on, well, who's that one team that finds their way in? And Bama beat number 1 ranked Georgia. Like, I think we just avoid all that conversation completely, and Texas does find their way into the college football playoff. And then I'll also say, when it comes to the SEC, like, the great part about this, Trey, is in the future, if we go back to our history, and I think I want to double check here to make sure I'm not wrong in saying this. I believe this time next year, when it comes to Thanksgiving week, on actual Thanksgiving Day, we will go back. Let me double check here to make sure I'm right. We will go back to having Texas A&M and Texas. Now, it looks like let's see here. The date is to be announced, so we'll see. You would have to believe they'll do Texas A&M again on Thanksgiving, right? Like, that has to happen.
Has to happen. Classic. Taken from us.
I think they're built the right way for the SEC, especially if Quinn Ewers does come back. Sounds like he's 90%. Like, experienced quarterback, should still be good in line of scrimmage, will recruit well, know who they are with the head coach. Like, I think they're actually in good shape. Now, do they win the SEC year one? You know, you still got Bama in there. You still got Georgia in there, even though they beat Bama this year. I think they'll be an upper tier team in the SEC to start. What about you?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm excited. We talked about it earlier. Got to see them. Got to see, what the makings of what's going to be an excellent roster entering the SEC. And, it's interesting, some of these early matchups. Alabama and Texas this year. And now, Oklahoma enters the league. Alabama will play them as well. I think Texas is what? Florida is one of their big matchups. Does Georgia play Texas in their opening
Georgia
campaign?
plays Texas, I believe, yes. Early. I don't know when they play them exactly, but I know that they play them their first year. Yep. We'll get Texas, Georgia. It'll be good, man.
It's incredible. Not to, sidetrack it here again too much, but you look at just what the schedules are going to be around the country with all this realignment. Look at USC's schedule. Take the time, ladies and gentlemen, to Google the USC Trojans schedule for next season. They play LSU to open the season. I think week 3 is Michigan. They're going to have to play Ohio State. I mean, it's next year, some of these weekends, some of these games. And I know we had some deader weekends. None of them were bad weekends of football this year, but I don't think you're going to have any of those next year. I mean, the slates are incredible. That's the thing I'm most excited for. But I do think, Texas and Oklahoma both enter this league and, find early success in this league. And
Texas plays Michigan next year, too, for their non-conference. So, it's going to be some buckle-up kind of college football Saturdays, Trey. Like, that's the funny part about realignment. I know we're running out of time here. The funny part about realignment is we hate when it happens. We hate the losing of rivalries. We hate the tectonic plate shifting, like the ugly part of realignment and the money part of realignment we're not fans of. But when we get to actually having the games, when we see Texas, Georgia, when we see USC, Michigan, like, dude, when they actually kick off and they have their first drive and you got, let's say it's, Brock Vandagriff leading the troops down the field for Georgia against Texas, like, dude, that's going to be awesome. That's going to be a lot of fun.
This is going to be incredible. I got one more for you, JD, because I love the next time we're going to be able to chalk it up on here. But do we have an update on NCAA football, the video game? I know you've kind of had your finger on the pulse there, and I haven't heard an update in a minute.
I haven't heard an update either. But if we don't get the game here, like, at this point, I don't care who's in it. Like, we'll download rosters. We'll find a way. Put whoever you want in it. There are people out there that have given their lives to making college football, the video game, as updated as possible since NCAA 14. We got rosters out there. We got a way. Give us the game. Give us a cover. Give us a couple new features. Give us NIL. Give us the transfer portal. Give us a sick road to glory mode, and we're good. Like, I just need an updated version with the graphics and some of the uniforms and some of the other features in college football. Give us the game. We'll handle the rest. Don't worry about it, is where I would fall on that, Trey. That's where I would fall. So I hope that all the people that make that game are watching, because I'm sure they always are. But, hey, Trey, I appreciate you jumping in here, man.
JD,
just absolutely crushing it.
So much for having me today. This has been a blast. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us in the comments and tuning in and hitting the like button. Get us to 100 if we're not there yet. JD, I haven't looked.
Blew past it.
Oh,
folks blew past it.
Well, happy
as we
Thanksgiving.
knew they would. We knew they would. But, like,
we're thankful. Very thankful for him.
Hey, thankful for you, man.
Thankful for you, JD. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy holidays, everybody. Appreciate you, JD.
That's the man, the myth, the legend. Trey Yannity jumping in. Again, Nick Brake, high demand kind of guy. Who can blame him? A lot of people tugging at his shirt these days, trying to get him over to do some work for them. And we appreciate Nick. We miss Nick. Nick, when you're back, brother, it's going to be a good time. Trey Yannity stepping in and just absolutely crushing it today. Giving takes, managing the chat, punching the show live. Like, I mean, dude's an animal. Couple of just beasts running the show here for On 3 between Nick Brake and Trey Yannity. Again, we will be on the air tomorrow, same time. If you think we're not having a show on Thanksgiving, you're out of your mind. We have a show, 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. We'll talk some ball. It will not be live, so there will not be a live chat. So to talk some ball after the show, get at me on Instagram, at JD Pickell. Again, I'm going to post the question here, or the question and answer sticker here on my page here in just a minute. Bottom line, hey, we love y'all. We appreciate y'all. We are so thankful for y'all. There's so much to be thankful for, and we're grateful. Period, mic drop, the end. So for Trey Yannity, for myself, JD Pickell, we're going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all next time. Happy Thanksgiving.